A gunshot that should have brought silence instead delivered a horrifying awakening. Trapped in the body of a stranger named Klein Moretti, Zhou Mingrui finds himself in a grim world of gas lamps and shadows, bearing a fatal head wound that miraculously heals itself. The scene is a paradox, a clear suicide, complete with a revolver and a cryptic note promising death for all, yet he lives. With the original Klein's memories shattered and useless, only one desperate clue remains, a bizarre luck enhancement ritual performed just before his transmigration. Is this dangerous magic his curse, or his only key to returning home? As he navigates the unfamiliar streets on a mission to repeat the ritual, a chance encounter reveals an even greater mystery. This world's most famous divination tool, the tarot, was invented by the legendary Emperor Roselle, a man who may have been a fellow traveler from his own world. Now, a mysterious street diviner offers him a glimpse into his fate using those very cards. But when the deck is cut and the cards are laid out, will they reveal a path home, or a truth about Klein's death far more terrifying than suicide? Upon hearing Klein's question, Dunn looked out of the window toward the corridor that led to Cheney's gate. He took out his pipe, stuffed it with some tobacco and mint leaves, and held it to his nose. He took a deep whiff as his voice turned reflective and drifting.
Only at home can I enjoy the beautiful flavors of tobacco mixed with mint leaves without any worries. Klein, do you know about the creation myth? Of course, when I received primary education during Sunday school, we learned to read using the revelation of Evernight. Among them, the Book of Wisdom and the Letters from the Saints mention the myth of creation.
Klein attempted to recall via the memory fragments of the original Klein. He slowed down his tempo and said,
"The Creator awoke from chaos and shattered the darkness, creating the first ray of light. He then fused himself completely into the universe and made up all of existence. His body became the land and stars. One of his eyes became the sun, while the other became the crimson moon. Some of his blood rushed into the seas and rivers, nourishing and nurturing lives."
Klein subconsciously paused when he said that. Partially, it was because the relevant memories were a blur and that the creation myth was very similar to the Chinese creation myth of Pangu. The imaginations of people from different worlds shared something in common on their myths and legends. Noticing that Klein was having trouble, Dunn smiled and added,
"His lungs turned into the elves, his heart turned into the giants, his liver turned into the Treants, his brain turned into the dragons, his kidneys turned into the feather serpents, his hair turned into the phoenixes, his ears turned into the demonic wolves, his mouth and teeth turned into the mutants, and his remaining bodily fluids turned into the sea monsters, of which the essence was Naga. His stomach, his small and large intestines, and the evil parts of his body turned into devils, evil spirits, and various kinds of unknown maleficent existences. His spirit became the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of the storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. His wisdom gave birth to humanity." That was the first epoch, the chaos epoch.
Klein finished the last sentence for Dunn, but he found it funny and ridiculous. As a keyboard folklorist, it was the first time he came into contact with a creation myth that was arranged in such great detail. It was so detailed that almost every prominent race corresponded to a particular body part of the creator. It's like a children's song with children sitting in a row and eating fruit. Furthermore, it was not only mentioned in the canon of the Evernight goddess. The churches of the Lord of Storms and God of Steam and Machinery also had similar descriptions. None of them alleviated themselves or devalued the other gods. This either means that the creation myth is real or hints that the few churches had undergone a long period of strife before compromising before the fifth epoch. With this in mind, Klein suddenly had another question. He asked with a frown,
"It feels problematic. Why are the eternal blazing sun, Lord of storms, and God of knowledge and wisdom born directly from the Creator's spirit, while the goddess isn't?"
In the revelation of Evernight's prehistorical records, the Evernight goddess had only awoken at the end of the second epoch. Together with the Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and other gods, She blessed and helped humanity survive the cataclysm. It was also known as the Third Epoch, the Cataclysm Epoch. It was during that time that Mother Earth and the god of war appeared as well. As for the god of steam and machinery, whose original name was the god of craftsmanship, he was born only in the Fourth Epoch. In that sense, the standing among the gods seemed self-evident. The ones who were more ancient was more orthodox. It was extremely clear. This also troubled the believers of the Evernight goddess. Dunn Smith held his pipe with another hand and instead of answering, he returned with a question.
Repeat the goddess's full title.
Klein immediately felt like he had stabbed himself with a knife. He racked his brains and tried his best to recall.
The Evernight goddess is nobler than the stars and more eternal than eternity. She is also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of the Secrets, the Empress of Disaster and Horror, Mistress of Calm and Silence.
Thankfully, Klein's mother was a devout believer of the Evernight goddess. When she was still alive, she would recite this every evening at dinner. Even though the memories of the original Klein had fragmented, not all was lost. Dunn asked with a guiding tone.
What does the Lady of Crimson symbolize? The red moon.
The moment Klein answered, he immediately understood. Dunn asked with a smile.
Then which part of the Creator did the red moon come from? A single eye.
Klein and Dunn smiled at each other. This was no way less impressive than the Lord of Storms, who was formed from a third of the Creator's spirit. As for the churches of Mother Earth and the god of war, they likely had similar explanations. However, the god of steam and machinery had been born too late to find a reason. Thus, their church had been weak in the past 1,000+ years. It was only with the invention of the steam engine that they seized the opportunity to truly be on par with the other gods. Dunn stroked his pipe gently.
Humanity was born out of the wisdom of the Creator. So we have clever and extraordinary brains, but lack other magical powers. However, from the creation myth, we can form a simple but clear conclusion. Everything stems from the same origin. Stems from the same origin.
Klein repeated the last few words.
According to this conclusion, humans who were protected by the gods were able to resist the giants, devils, and the mutants. Gradually, they figured out means to obtain the power of the Beyonders. That is by using the corresponding parts of the evil spirits, dragons, monsters, magical trees, flowers, or crystals, and combining them with other materials to form potions. By consuming and absorbing the potion, one will gain different powers. This is common knowledge among mysticism studies.
Dunn did not elaborate in detail and only gave a brief introduction.
In this process, our ancestors relied on painful lessons to discover that if they were to consume high-grade or extraordinary potions, it would easily lead to tragic consequences. There are 3 possible outcomes. Which 3? First, mental death and the complete breakdown of a body. Every piece of flesh would become a terrifying monster. Second, their personality will be changed by the powers contained in the potion. They will turn cold, sensitive, irascible, cruel, and indifferent. Third,
Dunn put down his pipe and picked up a porcelain cup and took a sip.
Fermo coffee from the Paz River Valley is bitter, but very fragrant. It leaves a splendid aftertaste. Do you want one?
Klein politely declined.
I prefer coffee from the Fenapotter Plateau. Of course, I have only drank it a few times at Welch's place. What's the third outcome?
Dunn emphasized the words losing control.
Mental disorder. Turning crazy on the spot. Becoming more devilish than the devil. This is what it means by losing control.
Without waiting for Klein to say a word, he put down his coffee cup and continued.
After a long period of experimentation and exploration, together with the birth of the blasphemy slate, humans have finally perfected the potion system. We formed a tiered system that chains in a stable progression paths, known as sequences. The lower the number in a sequence, the higher the grade of a potion. At this point, the 7 major churches each control at least one complete sequence. Besides, There are also incomplete paths that they have gathered over the past hundreds or 1,000 years.
Klein sharply noticed the term.
Blasphemy slate?
At the gathering, the hanged man had also mentioned it. According to the hanged man, the blasphemy slate was the most critical factor of a potion system formation and completion. That seemed to contradict what Dunn had just said. Dunn said vaguely,
Those were things created by some evil gods. As for which era it appeared, what it contains, or what's so special about it, I am unsure as well. If you discover any clues, you have to immediately report it to me. It deserves the highest level of response. I mentioned one of the types of losing control. I'll now tell you the remaining 4. All right.
Klein pushed the question of the blasphemy slate to the back of his mind and listened attentively.
Although humans have clever minds, they lack extraordinary powers. It is not absolute. There are always a few lucky ones. Perhaps I should call them the unlucky ones. They are born with relatively higher perception. Well, it also means the ability to sense spirits. They can hear voices that others cannot hear and see things that others cannot see. They have partial characteristics of beyonders.
While Dunn spoke, he looked at the empty air around him and watched Klein shudder in fear.
In other words, if they are half a sequence 9 beyonder and have fixed characteristics. Oh, sequence 9 is the lowest grade in the chain. In short, they can only choose a corresponding, fixed sequence pathway. If they consume other potions, the effects might range from mental disorders to a loss of control, or even worse, death.
Klein nodded slowly.
Got it. The third kind is similar to the second kind. Once you choose a sequence chain, you will be forced to go down that path. There will be no room for regret. If you were to consume potions from the corresponding sequence of other paths, there will be a high probability you will get mixed, unusual, and warped powers. But it is almost certain that you would be in a semi-deranged state, sensitive and irascible, cruel and bloodthirsty, and silent and melancholic. And there is only one such opportunity. After that, regardless if you consume the potions from the original path or potions in the present sequence, the only result is a loss of control. The outcome could then be mental death. Alternatively, the body breaks down into monsters or even transforms into an evil spirit.
As Dunn spoke, he lifted his coffee cup to take a sip. Klein, who turned alarmed and fearful after hearing this, fell silent for a few seconds before asking,
What about the fourth kind? The fourth kind. Haha. That is the most common problem. When we consume potions to gain powers that originally belonged to extraordinary beings, we undergo an unnatural transformation. Therefore, we would more or less be affected by the remnant spiritual powers. While perhaps the symptoms might not manifest and are undetectable to others, it will definitely lurk in one's mind. If one rushes to consume the corresponding potion ranked higher in the sequence, before fully grasping the extraordinary powers the potion brings and eliminating the subtle traces, the madness will accumulate, increasing the chances of losing control.
Dunn suddenly fell silent. After a short pause, he said with a sigh,
As per the internal rules of us Nighthawks, even if a teammate were to make a great contribution, they must have consumed the last potion 3 years ago and be examined before they can be promoted. Even so, there are still many who lose control every year.
Klein drew a gasp as he asked,
How terrifying! Then what about the final kind?
There was no trace of a smile despite Dunn's curved lips.
The fifth kind is the most common reason for a loss of control. For beyonders, one's spiritual perception would be enhanced more or less. The smaller the number in the sequence, the more enhanced their perception. Therefore, they would hear what others cannot hear, see what others cannot see, and encounter things others would not encounter. They are constantly met with mysterious enticement and illusionary bewitchment. Once they're overstimulated or have greedy desires, they will slowly go down the path of losing control.
As he spoke, Dunn looked straight at Klein, his gray pupils reflecting Klein's figure. His tone turned bleak as he said,
The founder of the Nighthawks, Archbishop Cheney's, once said, "We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness." We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against dangers and madness.
The corridor outside the window was sealed, its walls ice-cold. The room was illuminated with bright yellow lights. Dunn Smith's delivery echoed, sending blow after blow to Klein's heart. It left him temporarily at a loss for words. Dunn shook his head and smiled when he saw Klein silent.
Are you very disappointed? Beyonders are not like what you imagine them to be. We are always treading alongside danger.
Klein recovered from his shock as he answered with a quivering voice.
There is always a price to any gain.
It was true that he never imagined that the halo, extraordinariness, and the inordinary aspects of a Beyonder would have such hidden threats. Perhaps it was only because he was hearing a description without witnessing it firsthand, and that he had been sucked into the vortex with a peculiar incident already befalling him. Klein soon brought his fear, uneasiness, worry, and apprehension under control. Of course, the thought of shrinking back was inevitable. It lingered around and refused to leave. Dunn finished the last mouthful of coffee and added,
Not bad. Very mature and rational. Also, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine them to be, especially a low-sequence Beyonder. Why would we use 1 to represent the highest grade and 9 the lowest? Isn't this against intuition and logic? The low sequence we often mention refers to a low grade or a high number. They're the starting point of the sequence chain. All right, where was I? Yes, Beyonders are not as powerful as you imagine. A low-sequence Beyonder's power is no match for guns, much less cannons. They are just more fascinating and indefensible than firearms. If you have a chance to become a Beyonder in the future, you must consider what I said today carefully. Do not make a rash decision.
Klein gave a self-deprecating smile.
I don't even know when I will have the chance.
He felt that he would not miss the opportunity if it presented itself to him. Consuming the wrong potion or a higher-ranked potion in the sequence could be mostly avoided. The major potential danger was the subtle influences the potions had and what he experienced from having heightened auditory and visual perceptions. For the former, he could draw on the experiences from generations of people before him. As long as he was not in a rush to advance himself and patiently grasped control over his powers, the chances of losing control were relatively low. Furthermore, he still had to resolve the potential problem that he currently faced. He had to understand the essence of mysticism and seek a way to transmigrate back. These were the underlying reasons for taking the first step. He did not aim for higher sequence spots. If it was easy to lose control, he could just forget about advancement, stay in his original sequence, and rely on knowledge to plan a way home. It was needless to elaborate on the potential risks. Back when Klein held the luck enhancement ritual, he was nearly driven crazy. The murmurings that nearly blew up his head were still fresh in his mind. They were not unavoidable by not becoming a Beyonder. Therefore, it was better to gain power that allowed him to defend himself. With this in mind, Klein felt that the pros clearly outweighed the cons. It made his thoughts of withdrawal almost disappear. Dunn picked up his pipe again as his gray eyes carried a smiling trace to them.
I cannot give you an accurate answer on this. To become a Beyonder, firstly, you must make enough contributions. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, you would be able to interpret critical ancient documents. Maybe you would be able to give us valuable ideas for one of our cases. Secondly, it depends on the arrangements of the higher-ups. No one can be sure. All right, I believe you should know quite a bit about Beyonders now. In the future, do not make a rash decision. Now, I'll introduce you to our Nighthawk team's civilian jobs.
He stood up and walked to the door. He pointed in the opposite direction of Cheney's gate and said,
We have an accountant and someone else who is in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies handed out by the church and the police department while standing in as a carriage driver. They are professionals and do not need to take shifts, so they can rest on weekends. The other 3 civilian staff are Roseanne, Brett, and Old Neil. Their jobs include attending to visitors, cleaning the rooms, and writing case files and inventory registration lists. They also guard the armory, storeroom, and the archives, strictly enforcing the registration should someone wish to enter, take out, or return an item. Each of them has 1 day off a week, other than Sundays. They negotiate among themselves on the arrangement of night shifts and rest days.
Klein swept away his thoughts about Beyonders and tried to clarify his job responsibilities.
So is my job scope the same as Roseanne and the rest?
Dunn said with a smile.
No, there's no need. You are a professional. You currently have 2 tasks. First, every morning or afternoon, go take a stroll outside. Focus on the various streets that lead from Welch's place to yours. What?
Klein was dumbfounded. What kind of job is this? Is that very professional? Dunn inserted his hands into the pockets of his black windbreaker and said,
After you confirm that you have lost your memories, we will close the case on Welch and Naya. Similarly, that diary of the Antigonus family has vanished completely. We suspect that you brought it with you. You might have hidden it on your way home, which might be why we did not find any clues at your place. This is also likely the reason why you were not there, and chose to commit suicide at home. Although you were mysteriously influenced and have forgotten this piece of memory, the human spirit and brain is very fascinating, so there might be residual traces. Daly might not be able to obtain them through her means as a medium, but it does not mean that they do not exist. Perhaps you will feel a sense of déjà vu at a familiar and critical spot. That is what we wish to obtain.
Got it. Klein was enlightened. The Nighthawk's deduction of the diary's location was indeed reasonable. He was the only one alive among the people involved. Only he had the time and motive to take the diary away and hide it on his way back. Dunn encouraged, indirectly revealing the importance of the diary.
If you can find a diary this way, you will likely made enough of a contribution to become a Beyonder.
Klein nodded.
I hope.
Dunn changed the subject again.
Secondly, you get a day off every week. You can decide which day it is for now. When you're not outside, go to our armory and read the literature and canon books. This is a job for a professional historian. When you finish them all, you will have to begin taking shifts with Old Neil and the rest.
Klein heaved a sigh of relief.
All right, no problem.
This is not something too difficult. At this moment, Dunn turned his body halfway and pointed to the black outward swinging gates that was engraved with 7 sacred emblems.
This is Cheney's Gate. It is named after the creator of the modern Nighthawk system, Archbishop Cheney's. There is one under the central cathedral of every major city. It is guarded by formal Nighthawk members on rotation. Inside, there are at least 2 keepers who were sent by the church, as well as countless traps. You must not approach it under any circumstance. Otherwise, misfortune will befall you.
Klein expressed his feelings.
That sounds scary.
Dunn introduced in passing.
The area inside is divided into a few zones. Stored within are certain potion formulas for certain sequences and other magical materials. It is also used to temporarily hold heretics, mutants, cultists, and members of secret organizations. Haha, they will eventually be sent to the Holy Cathedral.
Holy Cathedral? The headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess located in the Winter County to the north of the kingdom, Cathedral of Serenity? Klein nodded slightly as though he was pondering over the matter. Dunn hesitated for a moment before adding.
In addition, there are all sorts of classified documents and records inside. When you gain a higher clearance, you might have a chance of reading them. Behind a Chinese gate, there are also sealed artifacts in the basement.
Klein ruminated on the terms.
Sealed artifacts?
It sounded like a specialized term. Dunn paused for a moment before continuing.
Some of the extraordinary items we gather and retrieve are just too important and magical. If they fall into the wrong hands, it would cause immense destruction. Therefore, we have to keep it strictly confidential and watch them carefully. Even we can only use it under special circumstances. Besides, there are some things inside that are very special. They had certain living characteristics which can entice the keepers. It would influence the surroundings, attempt escape, and cause catastrophic outcomes. They have to be strictly controlled.
Klein commented wistfully.
How fascinating.
Dunn described in detail.
The Nighthawk headquarters have categorized these sealed artifacts into 4 grades. Grade 0 represents extremely dangerous. They are of the highest importance and of the highest confidentiality. They are not to be inquired, disseminated, described, or spied. They can only be sealed in the basement of the Holy Cathedral. Grade 1 is highly dangerous. They can be used in limited ways. Their security clearance is limited to diocesan bishops or Nighthawk deacons and above. The Central Cathedral of Diocese headquarters like Backlund can store 1 to 2 artifacts. The rest will be handed over to the Holy Cathedral. Grade 2 is dangerous. They can be used with care and moderation. The security clearance requires 1 to be a bishop or a Nighthawk team's captain and above. The central cathedrals in the various cities can store 3 to 5 artifacts. The rest will be turned into the Holy Cathedral or the diocese headquarters. Grade 3 is considerably dangerous. They have to be used carefully. It can only be applied for operations that require 3 or more people. The security clearance requires 1 to be a formal member of the Nighthawks. In the future, you will see the corresponding documents. Through the numbers, you can understand what they represent. For instance, 2 to 125 means that it is a dangerous grade-sealed artifact now. 125.
As Dunn went on, he suddenly turned around and returned to his room. He pulled out a piece of paper from the bottom of the drawer.
By the way, take a look at this. 3 years ago, a newly appointed archbishop lost control. For some unknown reason, he stormed through the various levels of protection and vanished mysteriously with a grade 0 sealed artifact. Memorize this photo. If you discover him, do not alert or disturb him. Return to report it immediately, or the chance of you dying in the line of duty is 1,000%. What?
Klein received the piece of paper. There was no title on it, just a black and white photo with a few lines of words. Zangwill. Male. 40 years old. Former archbishop. A gatekeeper who failed in his promotion and was enticed by the devil and was corrupted. He escaped with sealed artifact 0-08. Particular traits are. The picture depicted Zangwill as wearing an all-black clergyman robe with buttons on both sides and a soft cap. His hair was dark blonde and his pupils were so blue that it was nearly black. He had a high nose and his lips were tightly pursed. His facial features were like a classic sculpture without any wrinkles. The most striking characteristic was that he was blind in one eye. Klein honestly offered his first impression.
The description of the corrupted is so detailed, but the only thing about the sealed artifact is its code name.
Dunn said with a sigh.
That's why it is at the highest security clearance. The search for sealed artifacts now. 0-08 is only described verbally and never written in words. Even so, the description will be little. 0-08 appears to be a common quill, but it does not need ink to write. That's all.
Dunn did not dive deeper into the topic. He tugged at the golden chain on his black windbreaker and took out a gorgeous pocket watch of the same color. With a soft click, he opened it and took a glance before pointing outside.
I've told you all you need to know. Go to the armory to find Old Neil. Get him to arrange the documents that you need to read. He is no ordinary civilian clerk. He was once a formal member, but due to his advanced age, he failed to be promoted. His health is ailing, so it's no longer suitable for him to handle cases. Furthermore, he does not wish to become an internal keeper or rest at home. All he wishes is to be accompanied by documents and records. Okay.
Klein bowed slightly as he wore his short top hat again. However, his mind was preoccupied with how sealed Artifact 0-08 looked. It appears to be just your everyday quill. It writes without ink. Then, what is its actual use? What makes it classified at the highest level of confidentiality that it's deemed extremely dangerous? Can it be a pen that kills anyone whose name is written? No, that would be way too heaven-defying. Insane Will wouldn't need to escape and hide away if that were the case. Just as Klein turned around to leave, Dunn suddenly shouted out to him.
Hold on. I forgot something.
Klein turned his head, his eyes puzzled.
What?
Dunn put back his pocket watch and said with a smile.
Later, remember to visit the accountant, Mrs. Oriana, and get an advance payment of 4 weeks, a total of £12. After that, you'll earn half your salary every week until the difference is covered.
Klein said subconsciously.
That's too much. There's no need for this. The amount should be reduced.
He had no objection towards an advanced payment. After all, he didn't even have the money needed to pay for the public horse carriage trip home. However, to receive £12 at once left him a little afraid. Dunn said as he shook his head and smiled.
No, it's necessary.
He paused when he saw Klein nod in agreement. He smiled and sized up Klein's garbs and said with a meaningful intent.
Think about it. Do you still wish to continue living in your present apartment? One that needs you to share a bathroom with so many other tenants? Even if you aren't taking yourself into consideration, think about the lady. Besides, you need a cane, and you should buy a new suit.
Klein was taken aback for a second before snapping back to reality. His face immediately burned with embarrassment since the suit he was wearing was cheap and of inferior quality. Typically, a top hat was made of silk, costing 5 to 6 soldi. A bow tie was 3 soldi. A walking cane inlaid with silver was 7 to 8 soldi. A shirt was 3 soldi, while pants, a vest, and tuxedo were around £7 in total. Leather boots were 9 to 10 soldi. As such, an entire suit cost more than £8 and 7 soldi. Of course, to be a presentable gentleman, one needed a watch chain, a pocket watch, and a wallet. Back then, the original Klein and Benson scrimped and saved before managing to save up a pool of money. When they went to a clothing store to check the price, they ended up running off without even bothering to try haggling. They each bought a set at a bargain shop near Iron Cross Street for a total of less than £2. It was also because of that incident that original Klein had a deep impression of the prices of clothes. Klein stammered a reply.
Oh, okay.
He was like the original Klein. He was someone who cared about his appearance. Dunn took out the pocket watch again and with another click, took a glance at it.
Perhaps you should find Mrs. Oriana first. I know you'll spend quite some time at Old Neil's while Mrs. Oriana will likely be returning home soon. All right.
Klein was acutely aware of his state of poverty and did not object to it. Dunn returned to the table's side and pulled at a few hanging ropes as he said.
I'll get Roseanne to bring you there.
The ropes began their operation as the gears ground, producing a chime from a bell at the reception area of Blackthorn Security Company. When Roseanne heard it, she hurriedly stood up and carefully made her way down. It did not take long before she appeared in front of Klein again. Dunn said humorously.
I did not disturb your rest, right? Oh, bring Moretti to Mrs. Oriana.
Roseanne secretly curled her lips as she answered happily.
All right, Captain.
At that moment, Klein blurted out in surprise.
Is that all?
To get his advance payment from finance, isn't there a need to get an approval letter from the captain? Shouldn't you write something? Dunn returned with a question.
So?
Klein tried his best to use simple language.
I mean, don't I need your signature to claim an advance payment from Mrs. Oriana?
Dunn pointed at the brown-haired girl and gave a reply.
Oh no. There's no need. Roseanne is enough proof.
Captain, it seems there's almost zero management of our finances. Klein resisted his urge to deliver a sarcastic comment before turning to leave the room with Roseanne. At that moment, he heard Dunn shout out again.
Hold on. There's still another thing.
Can we finish it all at once? Klein turned back with a smiling face.
Yes.
Dunn pressed at his temple and said.
When you meet old Neil, remember to collect 10 demon-hunting bullets.
Klein returned in astonishment.
Me? Demon-hunting bullets?
Dunn inserted a single hand into his pocket and said.
Walter's revolver is still with you, right? There's no need for you to turn it in. With the demon-hunting bullets, if you were to face within paranormal danger, you will be able to protect yourself. It will give you some courage at the very least.
There's no need for you to add on the final sentence. Just as Klein was vexing over the problem, he answered without any hesitation.
All right. I'll remember to do so.
Dunn sat down and picked up the dark red fountain pen. He scribbled a note, signed it, and stamped it.
This will require me to write a formal document. Wait a moment.
Klein received it sincerely.
Thank you, Captain.
He slowly walked back before turning around. Dunn shouted one more time.
Hold on.
Captain, you look to be in your 30s. Why do you have the symptoms of dementia? Klein squeezed out a smile and turned around to ask.
Anything else?
Dunn smacked his forehead.
I forgot earlier that you're not trained in shooting, so getting demon-hunting bullets would be useless. Let's do this. Collect 30 normal bullets every day. Take the opportunity when you are out to go to the street corner, the underground shooting range at No. 3, Zutland Street. Most of it belongs to the police department, but there is one that is specially for us Nighthawks. Oh, right, you also need to get a badge from old Neil. Otherwise, you won't be able to enter the shooting range.
He took back the note from Klein, then added the information and stamped it with another seal. Dunn handed back the modified note to Klein.
A good marksman is produced by expending bullets. Do not think lightly of it.
Klein, who was fearful of danger, yearned to visit the shooting range that very day.
Got it.
He took 2 steps towards the exit before carefully turning around halfway. He deliberated before asking.
Captain, is there anything else?
Dunn nodded firmly.
No.
Klein heaved a sigh of relief and walked straight out the door. While walking, he had the strong urge to turn around to ask another, "Are you sure there's nothing else?" He resisted that urge and finally left the keeper room successfully. As Roseanne walked by his side, she softly disparaged the captain.
Captain has always been this way. He often forgets things. Even my granny has a better memory than him. Of course, he only forgets the trivial stuff. Yeah, trivial stuff. Klein, I'll call you Klein in the future. Mrs. Oriana is a very affable person. It is easy to hit it off with her. Her father is a watchsmith with excellent skill.
As Klein listened to the brown-haired girl rattle on, he stepped into the stairwell and returned to the upper floor. He found Mrs. Oriana in the far office on the right-hand side. She was a black-haired woman dressed in a flounce lace dress. She appeared in her 30s and had fashionable curly hair. Her pair of green eyes were clear and smiling, and she seemed refined and elegant. After Oriana heard Roseanne repeat Dunn Smith's instructions, she took out a note and wrote an advance slip.
Sign here. Do you have a seal? If not, you can leave a thumbprint.
Now familiar with the procedures, Klein completed the formalities.
All right.
Oriana took out a copper key and opened the safe in the room. As she counted the pounds, she said with a smile,
You are lucky. We have enough cash today. By the way, Klein, were you invited by Captain because you were involved in a paranormal activity and the fact that you have a specialty?
Klein was not stingy with his compliments.
Yes, you have an impeccable intuition.
Oriana took out 4 notes with light gray backgrounds with deep black patterns printed on them. After locking the safe, she turned around and smiled.
That's because I had a similar experience too.
Klein showed an appropriate level of surprise.
Really?
Oriana handed over the 4 gold pounds to Klein.
Do you know about the serial killer that sent Tingen City into a frenzy 16 years ago?
Klein thought about it and said,
Yes. It's the one which had 5 girls killed consecutively. Some had their hearts and stomachs removed by that bloody butcher. My mother often used that matter to scare my sister when we were young.
He received the notes and discovered that 2 of them were in 5-pound denominations and 2 of them were in 1-pound denominations. All of them had a gray background and were inked in black. The 4 corners had complicated patterns in special ink to prevent counterfeiting. The former notes were slightly bigger and in the middle of them was Lone Kingdom's 5th king, George III direct ancestor, Henry Augustus I. He wore a white hair band above his rotund face. His eyes were slender and he had an abnormally serious expression. However, Klein felt an indescribable sense of closeness to him. This was a 5-pound note. It's almost equal to 4 weeks of Benson's salary. In the middle of the 1-pound note was George III father, the former king, William Augustus VI. This mighty figure had a thick mustache and a firm gaze. While he was in power, he freed the Lone Kingdom from the shackles of the old order, allowing his nation to regain the pinnacle spot. They were all good kings. Klein could faintly smell the note's ink that elated and refreshed him. Mrs. Oriana's tone still hinted at a sense of lingering fear despite the incident having happened more than 10 years ago.
Yes, if the Nighthawks had not come in time, I would have been the 6th victim.
Klein carefully folded the paper notes and placed it in an inner pocket of his suit. Then, he patted the area a few times to confirm it was there.
I heard that the serial killer, no, the butcher was a beyonder?
Mrs. Oriana gave a firm nod.
Yes, he had killed even more before that. The reason why he was captured was because he was preparing a ritual for the devil.
Klein said sincerely.
No wonder you wanted different organs. Sorry, Mrs. Oriana, for making you recall such a pleasant memories.
Oriana smiled.
I'm no longer afraid. I was studying accountancy in business school back then. After that incident, I've been here ever since. All right, I'll stop keeping you from what you should do. You still need to head to Old Neil's.
Klein took off his hat and bowed before leaving the office.
Goodbye, Mrs. Oriana.
Before he went downstairs, he could not help but pat his inner pocket to make sure the 12 pounds was still there. He did a turn at a cross junction and headed right. It did not take him long to see a half-closed iron door. A series of sharp taps echoed. While he knocked, an aged voice sounded from inside.
Come in.
Klein pushed open the metal door and discovered a cramped room which only allowed for a desk and 2 chairs. There was a tightly locked iron door inside the room and behind the desk was a hoary elder dressed in a class black robe. He was reading a few yellowed pages from a book with the illumination of a gas lamp. He raised his head and looked at the door.
Are you Klein Moretti? Roseanne said you were very polite when she came over a while ago.
Klein took off his hat as a gesture of respect.
Miss Roseanne is really a friendly person. Good afternoon, Mr. Neil.
Neil pointed to the silver tin can with complex flowery patterns on the table.
Have a seat. Would you like a cup of hand-ground coffee?
The wrinkles at the edge of his eyes and mouth were deeply recessed. His dark red pupils appeared slightly turbid. Klein acutely noticed that Neil's porcelain cup was filled with clear water.
It doesn't seem like you drink coffee.
Neil explained with a laugh.
Haha, it's a habit of mine. I do not drink coffee after 3 in the afternoon.
Klein asked in passing.
Why?
Neil held back his smile as he looked into Klein's eyes and said,
I'm afraid that it would affect my sleep at night. It will make me hear the murmurings of the unknown existence.
Klein was momentarily unable to answer him as he changed the subject.
Mr. Neil, what documents and books should I read?
As he spoke, he took out the note written by Dunn. Neil lamented.
Anything that has to do with history, or are complicated and incomplete. To be honest, I have always been trying to learn, but all I can achieve is a rudimentary grasp. It's just too troublesome for the other material, such as people's diaries, contemporary books, epitaphs, etc. For example, the things I have here require more detailed historical records to determine the exact content.
Klein turned confused.
Why?
Neil pointed to a few yellow pages in front of him.
These are from Roselle Gustav's lost diary before his death. In order to keep things secret, he used strange symbols he invented to take records.
Emperor Roselle? The Transmigration Senior? Klein was taken aback as he immediately listened attentively. Neil said with a shake of his head.
Many people believe that he did not truly die, but instead became a hidden god. Therefore, cults which revere him have always been holding various rituals to attempt at gaining power. We will occasionally encounter such incidents and obtain a few original or duplicated copies of the diary. Till date, no one has been able to decipher the special symbol's true meaning. Therefore, the Holy Cathedral has permitted us to keep copies for research, hoping that it would bring them a pleasant surprise.
With that said, Neil revealed a smug smile.
I have already deciphered a few symbols and have confirmed that they represent numbers. Look at what I discovered. It's actually a diary. Yes, I wish to use history from different periods, especially events that revolved around the emperor. By comparing those records to the ones written in the diary for the corresponding day, I can try to interpret more of the symbols.
The old gentleman with white hair and deep wrinkles looked at Klein with bright eyes.
That's the mind of a genius, right?
Klein nodded in agreement.
Yes.
Neil pushed the few yellow pages towards Klein.
Haha, you can also take a look at it. Tomorrow, you'll have to help me with this diary.
Klein turned them around and took a glance at them, but it immediately stunned him. Although the symbols had been copied in terribly ugly fashion, to the point of looking a little distorted, there was no way he could be mistaken. This was because they were words he was most familiar with, Chinese. And it's F***King simplified Chinese. In that instant, Klein even believed that he had transmigrated back. However, the elegant gas lamp surrounded by brass grids and the silver inlaid tin, which old Neil kept his hand-ground coffee in, made him recognize the reality he was in. The transmigrator, Emperor Roselle, is really a fellow countryman of mine? He was using simplified Chinese, which doesn't exist in this world, to record secrets. With the indescribable feeling of identifying an old friend in a different world, Klein quickly read through the 3 pages. November 18th. Truly a fascinating matter. A blue sky experimentation and a chance mistake made me discover the pathetic fellow lost and trapped in the deep darkness amid the storms. He can only approach the reality of this world on the day of the full moon every month, yet, he is unable to transmit his cries. He is lucky to have met me, the protagonist of this era. After reading the paragraph I wrote above, I suddenly felt a little down. Even my Chinese is written like a translation. For decades have passed in a finger snap. My past memories feel more like a dream. 1184, January 1st. At the Grand New Year Gala, Lady Florina was truly splendid. January 2nd. My diplomats are all idiots. January 3rd. I made a hasty choice back then. In hindsight, I should have chosen the apprentice, the seer, or the marauder. Unfortunately, there is no way of redoing it. January 4th. Why are my children so stupid? I've repeated myself so many times. Do not be fooled by those charlatans. The key thing about potions is not about grasping them, but digesting them. It's nothing about tapping powers, but acting. And the name of a potion is not solely symbolic at its core, but a concrete imagery, and the key to digestion. September 9th. An alliance opposing me has been established. Fasak from the north, Lone from the east, Phaenopotter from the south. My enemies have finally joined forces, but I have no fear. I will use facts to teach them that the generations of weapons and knowledge cannot be compensated by mere numbers and low-grade sequencers. Besides, it's not as though I do not have subordinates. As for the higher grades, have they forgotten who I am? September 23rd. I have lost communications with the ship seeking the forsaken land of the gods. I should consider inventing wireless telegraphs. I hope it would not be affected by the storm. September 24th. Miss Ithaca is more mesmerizing than Lady Florina. Perhaps, I'm just being nostalgic about my youth. Due to the complexity of characters in simplified Chinese, the font was slightly larger than normal, leading to less content on each page. Furthermore, for preservational and research purposes, the back of each page was left empty. But even so, Klein still felt an upheaval of emotions when he read the diary. In particular, Emperor Roselle's description of the crux of potions made him feel like he found the path to the solution. He was thrilled at having learned a priceless secret. Perhaps, this will be a beacon for my future path as a Beyonder. Well, the 3 pages belong to entries at different times. It seems Emperor Roselle only writes the year on the first entry of each year. It cannot be determined which year the 2 pages with September and November belong to. Who is the pathetic fellow he discovered? What do digesting and acting actually mean? Where's the forsaken land of the gods? These questions bubbled in Klein's head. It made him eager to immediately gather all of Emperor Roselle's diary and read it from cover to cover. At that moment, old Neil asked puzzledly across him.
Klein?
Klein jolted awake as he hurriedly covered it up with a laugh.
I thought I would be the most special one. I was trying to decipher and interpret it.
Old Neil nodded, laughing.
You are young indeed. I once believed that I was the most special one as well.
Klein flipped through the 3 pages in his hand, and after confirming that he had not missed anything, he handed it over to old Neil and thoughtlessly asked,
Do we only have these few pages?
I want to see more of Emperor Roselle's diary. Old Neil caressed the scripts as his wrinkles deepened from his scoff.
Did you think there would be many? There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. Sigh. The major reason is the gradual extinction of extraordinary species in our northern continent. Without them, there won't be a lot of potions, causing the number of Beyonders to reduce with time. Sigh. Over the past few centuries, dragons, giants, and elves have become simply records in books. Even the sea folks are no longer seen near the coastal waters.
Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly thought of a meme. He immediately said with a smile,
I think it's time to establish a Dragons and Giants Protection Association.
Old Neil looked confused when he heard that. It took him quite some time to figure out what it meant. After figuring out its meaning, he rapped the table and laughed quite heartily in a not-so-gentlemanly manner.
Haha, Klein, you really are humorous. This is a tradition of our lone kingdom. It's good that young people have a sense of humor. I believe we shouldn't be overly narrow in scope. Why are we only protecting dragons and giants? It should be called Fantastic Beast Protection Association.
Klein shook his head.
No. How can we forget those poor plants?
They exchanged looks and proclaimed in unison.
Fantastic Organisms Protection Association.
Both of them laughed tacitly. The awkwardness and unfamiliarity of the atmosphere between them dissipated considerably. Old Neil's wrinkles suffused a smile as he said,
There are fewer interesting young people like you these days. Where was I? I remember. There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. The retards who revere Emperor Roselle are the minority of the minority. It's already pretty good that we can obtain 3 scripts, while the other larger cathedrals or dioceses might have some.
After muttering a few words, He took the approval note which Klein had placed on the table earlier and took a look.
Are they pistol bullets, rifle bullets, or steam pressure bullets?
Klein answered honestly.
It's a revolver.
Old Neil made a joke that all men understood.
All right, I'll go get them. Ahem, do you have an armpit holster? As a gentleman, we can't let you have something bulging below your waist in public.
Klein smiled cooperatively.
No. Do I need to get Captain to include it?
Old Neil stood up and said.
There's no need. I just need to make a record. It's an accessory item. Repeat after me. Accessory item.
Klein joked.
Were you a teacher in the past?
Old Neil waved the note and took out a key from the drawer. He then opened the iron door that led into an inner chamber.
I spent some time at the church's Sunday school and free schools.
Beyonders do not seem much different from commoners. Klein murmured silently before casting his gaze on the table where the 3 pages of the diary were. Emperor Roselle is indeed involved in the realm of mystery. His diary is invaluable. To others, they are just pieces of scrap paper. It is unknown when they will be deciphered, but they are a valuable treasure to me. I wonder where the remaining parts of the diary are. I have to think of ways to get more. Klein's mind went through upheavals as he could hardly calm down. This continued until Old Neil came out and closed the iron door. Old Neil placed the items down on the table.
10 demon hunting bullets, 30 revolver bullets, an oxhide armpit holster, and a 7th Unit Special Operations Department badge. Please count them and give them a try. Remember to sign the logbook.
The revolver bullets were arranged neatly in a paper box which was divided into 3 layers. The bullets shimmered with a yellow sheen just like the bullets back home, but they appeared narrower. As for the demon hunting bullets, they were kept in a small iron box. The shape was identical to regular revolver bullets, but their surface was silver in color. Upon a more careful examination, there were complicated and dazzling patterns with tiny sacred emblems, a black background dotted with stars and a half-crimson moon, engraved at the bottom. The oxhide holster felt solid and it came with a belt and buckle. Beside it was a badge half the size of a palm. It had a metallic background with Ottawa County Police Department and 7th Unit Special Operations Department inscribed in silver text. They formed almost 2 sealed circles and surrounded the 2 crossed swords and a crowned police emblem. Klein said half wistfully and half probingly.
Unfortunately, it's not a Nighthawks badge.
Old Neil smiled and urged Klein to test the armpit holster. After he took off his jacket, Klein took quite a bit of effort to buckle up the holster, which hung close to his left armpit. He put on his jacket again.
Not bad.
Old Neil sized him up and nodded in satisfaction.
It suits you well. My judgment is as accurate as usual.
After putting away the other items into his pockets and signing the logbook, Klein had a short, casual conversation with Old Neil before leaving. Halfway, he suddenly slapped himself in the forehead.
I forgot to learn more about the sequences and potions. It's all the fault of Emperor Roselle's diary.
At this point, he was still unaware of what the first sequence of the complete pathway the Church of the Evernight Goddess possessed. All he knew was that it started with sequence 9. Roseanne had apparently mentioned something. The sleepless? Just as Klein was slowly walking towards the stairs, a person came down. He wore tight trousers which made movement easy. His white shirt was not tucked in, and he had a clear romantic temperament of a poet. He was none other than the black-haired, green-eyed police inspector who had previously came to search Klein's place. They had met upstairs previously, but they had not exchanged words. The young poet like Nighthawk greeted with a smile.
Good afternoon.
Klein answered humorously.
Good afternoon. I believe I do not need to introduce myself.
The young Nighthawk extended his right hand and said.
There's no need. I have a deep impression of you. Leonard Mitchell. Sequence 8's Midnight Poet.
Sequence 8. He's really a poet. Klein smilingly shook his hand as he returned with a question.
You have a deep impression of me?
Leonard Mitchell's green eyes were deep as he replied with a very faint smile.
You have a special disposition.
He feels and sounds so gay. The corners of Klein's mouth moved slightly as he barely said with a smile.
I don't think so myself.
Leonard pointed ahead.
After encountering an accident like that, you remain alive despite not receiving our protection immediately. That makes you special enough. I have to replace Captain. See you tomorrow.
Klein turned to make way for the Nighthawk.
See you tomorrow.
As he walked to the ends of the stairwell, Leonard Mitchell suddenly turned around and stared at the stone-paved ground which was illuminated by the yellow sunset. He muttered into the air softly.
Did you manage to notice anything? Indeed, there's nothing special about him,